Start recording. You can continue to put those answers in the chat. I want to welcome everybody tonight, whether you are a longtime member of the Athenaeum of Philadelphia or a first-time attendee. We are so grateful that you are here with us this evening. I'm Beth Hessel, the Executive Director. On screen, you also see Tess Galen, who has helped make this evening possible by signing you up on Eventbrite and getting out the Zoom link to you, and we're grateful for that, and running the social media. Our two special guests who I will introduce in just a moment also. First, I want to invite you, if you have not attended any event or known anything about the Athenaeum of Philadelphia before, I want to welcome you to this community of people who love books. You can see our circulating library right behind you, who love books and research, who love to learn about our community, our world, history, literature, art, and culture, who love to be in conversation together and talk about the ways that all of these ways of knowing about the world impact who we are today and how we serve and live in our community. So we would love to have you as a part of our community as well. To have the best experience here, I invite you when the program starts to click at the upper right-hand corner of your screen to speaker view, and that will give you our two speakers and hide Tess and I. At the bottom, you should see, especially if you're on a laptop or a computer, if you are on a mobile device, it will look a little different, but you should have both a chat icon and a Q&A. Chat icon, continue to answer that question, why do I give, as well as send out kudos to our speakers tonight. And if you're having technical problems, you could put a note there to Tess or I, and we will try to help you. The Q&A, normally we wait until the end of the program to take questions for the Q&A period, but tonight we are going to have fun, and Dr. Tyler is going to keep an eye on your questions in the Q&A section and incorporate them into his conversation with Dr. Freeman. So please, anytime you have a question that comes up to you in the middle of the conversation about the book, about the topics they're talking about, put them in the Q&A. So we'll have a lot of fun answering those during our conversation. Now, tonight, I want to introduce to you our special guests. The first is Dr. Tyrone McKinley Freeman, who's an award-winning scholar and teacher. He serves as Assistant Professor of Philanthropic Studies and Director of Undergraduate Programs at the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. He has served as professional fundraiser and also served as Associate Director of the Fundraising School at Indiana University, which has trained many nonprofit leaders here and around the world, including me, I'll have to say. It's a wonderful program. If you are in nonprofit and are looking for a place to increase your skills, definitely look at their program, which offers courses all over the place. His research focuses on the history of African American philanthropy and the history of American philanthropy and fundraising in higher education. And his work has appeared in many highly acclaimed, both academic and to the general public publications like Time and the Times, New York Times, USA Today, Harvard Business Review, News One, Black Perspectives, Philanthropy Women. And we are so pleased to have him here with us tonight. And this is going to be fun because Reverend Dr. Freeman is going to be in conversation with the Reverend Dr. Mark Kelly Tyler, who, if you are from Philadelphia, you know he is, since 2008, the senior pastor at Mother Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church here in Philadelphia, a leader in our community, a leading voice for theological education, for justice, and for so many issues that face us today. He is also an adjunct or affiliated professor at Payne Theological Seminary and New Brunswick Theological Seminary. In addition to Methodist Theological School in Ohio, he teaches homiletics and African American studies. And we're thrilled that you found the time also to join us tonight to have this conversation. I invite everyone who is here. Since we cannot see you, we have to do this virtually, but imagine that my hands are holding all of your hands in virtually welcoming our guests tonight, Tyrone McKinley Freeman and Mark Kelly Tyler. And I'm going to turn it over to you gentlemen now. Thank you for.
Well, thank you so very much, Dr. Hessel, and I'm so glad to be here tonight. Thank you for the invitation, and the Athenaeum, our neighbors, It's amazing that our first event together since I've been at Mother Bethel has to be virtual. And so hopefully in the future we could do something together. And I'm happy to be here tonight with and to share this virtual stage with Dr. Tyrone Freeman, one of the very important media presentations that he did that was left out of the intro, Dr. Beth, is when he came on the Power Hour on WURD and was our special guest, Bishop Royster and myself, not long ago. And I got to tell you, Dr. Freeman, I mean, your conversation that day, really kind of teasing this and lifting up this event tonight, just captivated our listening audience, and the feedback was incredible. They loved the story. So let's get into it. I mean, Madam C.J. Walker. So let me ask the obvious question: as a scholar, why?
Why? Well, thank you, sir. And first, allow me to say thank you to everyone tuning in tonight. Thank you to Beth Hessel and the staff at the Athenaeum. Thank you to my friends Nancy Scharf and Trina Gary for making the connection. I'm so excited to be here. Philadelphia is a second home for me, so I'm very happy to be connected. And thank you, good sir. It's an honor to be on with you. Why Madam Walker? The short of it is I really wanted to know more about her engagement as a philanthropist. The story about her, the lore about her usually focuses on the idea of her being this millionaire and this entrepreneur, someone you regularly learn about as a part of every Black History Month curriculum you can think of. And then usually after all those things to say, oh yeah, she gave to charity. Well, I'm a scholar of philanthropy. I really wanted to know, what was that about? Was she just kind of giving a little bit here and there, or was she really vested in it? What was she trying to do? And so that's what really put me on the path. I wanted to look at a well-known historical figure, but through a different lens, through her philanthropy and my own upbringing and own experience with philanthropy, African-American philanthropy figured into that. And so it became a perfect opportunity to re-examine this incredible life through philanthropy and open up a window into a very important part of American history and of Black culture.
Well, so let me ask you about that before we go too far back. I mean, what's the state of Black philanthropy today for the Madam C.J. Walkers of our time? And are there lessons that people, like the Oprah Winfreys of the world today, are people making the connection to the groundwork that she laid? And are they saying, one of my influences was what she did? I mean, yeah, if you can kind of help us understand the current state.
Well, it's funny. During the research, I was looking for some statement from Oprah where she made a connection. I have not found any public statement that she has made regarding that connection. But one of the things I want to be clear about is when I talk about philanthropy, I'm not talking about what the elite 1% do on behalf of society or the ways in which they invest in community. African American philanthropy has never been about what the elite do. It's about what each and every single person does to advance the race. You do not have to be wealthy. You do not have to be rich. You don't have to be famous. You just have to give. And with the religious sensibilities of our community, the strong foundation of the Black church being the first and the most important kind of philanthropic institution across that history, any and everyone can be a philanthropist in the African American tradition. And that's the story I seek to tell through Madam Walker, because she actually was giving long before she became a millionaire, long before she had the big mansion and the company with her name. She gave when she was actually a poor, penniless, widowed, struggling single mother in St. Louis that we can talk about. So this approach to philanthropy is not about what's in your bank account. It's really about what's in your heart and what's in your sense of connectedness to others, the sense of what's going on around us. And right now, this is a very powerful moment. You look at all the activism that's going on. You look at all the ways in which people are engaging in the issues of today. I include all of these things under philanthropy because of this tradition that Madam Walker represents. And it's not something that she created. It's something that she too was taught by her elders and by people around her. And I get into that story. But when you look at the protests today, you look at the activism, African Americans are very engaged, not only giving through their churches, but through giving circles, through fraternities and sororities, through women's clubs, through their own. There are some African Americans who have their own foundations and are going that route, or using donor advised funds or other accounting and tax related tools that have developed over the past several decades. But I'm taking a broad definition and view of philanthropy that really pushes back and challenges this notion that philanthropy is something that elite white people do to other people to other communities. No, this is a tradition of giving that goes back to the founding of America. Even before then, it has its roots in pre-colonial Western Africa. African Americans have always given, have always engaged, have always taken whatever they've had and used it for their own survival, used it to protest and push back against the larger circumstances that they found them in, and used it, which perhaps is their greatest gift, to make America better and to make America, hold America accountable for its promises of freedom and liberty for everyone.
So, well, listen, thank you for that very important distinction. And so, I mean, you know, you kind of think about life, and I was, you know, reading up on her. So you're talking about a person who was orphaned at an early age, who had hard financial times. For a lot of people, that's an excuse not to give. And, you know, I mean, I can't because I'm not in a position. I've got a daughter. There's no way I can do it. Maybe when times get better. What was it? I mean, the nature of the talk tonight is about the way the AME Church, you know, influenced her. Was it her relation to the AME Church? What made her tick?
Yeah. So I think so she was born Sarah Breedlove in 1867 on a cotton plantation in Delta, Louisiana. Her whole family, her parents and 4 siblings, had all been enslaved. And so, you know, emancipation came in 1865 with the Civil War and all those different things that were going on then. She's the first freeborn child into the family, right? But then she's orphaned within a few years. Both her parents are dead. She's under the care of her older sister, and is kind of moving around, moves to Mississippi. And this is during the time of Reconstruction, where for 12 short years, America actually was this biracial democracy. Black men had the right to vote. Slavery was over. There were troops in the South that were protecting Black people. You could kind of move about and begin to pursue and develop citizenship and freedom. But all of that was taken away. Angry white Southerners rose up and literally took their countries back in 1877. Reconstruction goes away, and Jim Crow, what we know now as Jim Crow, is left behind in the wake. So this is the context in which her early life takes place, right? So she's in the midst of all this, and you think of everything we know about lynching and the rise of Klan-like organizations and others. All these things are beginning to happen, and she's in her very early years. She marries as a teenager. She has a child. Her husband dies, so now she's widowed, and she's orphaned and dealing with poverty. And this thing called Jim Crow is being constructed around her. So it's a very difficult life. So the story begins to change when she moves to St. Louis in her early 20s. She goes there because St. Louis is kind of a promised land. It's this way station as Black people are moving out to the west. They're beginning to move up north. And her brothers are there. They have a barbershop. But once she gets there, she is actually greeted by St. Paul, African Methodist Episcopal Church, which you know still exists and is thriving well today in the St. Louis community. And this church had its own, as what I called, a Black philanthropic social safety net, that they had constructed this process by which to receive Black migrants, help people come in, get housing, get settled, get established, get their needs met. And Sarah becomes connected to St. Paul's, becomes a member, and is embraced by the women of that church. And this story really revolves around those women. So there are a lot of things that happen while she is a member of St. Paul's African Methodist Episcopal Church in her 20s and 30s that leads to this transformation that we know of her to become Madam C.J. Walker. And this is the kind of thing you didn't see in the Netflix series. If you watch the Netflix series with Octavia Spencer and Blair Underwood, they didn't really look at the transformative role of the church in her life. But that's the story I tell in the book, because there's some fundamental things that happen on the ground while she's a member of that church that literally set up the next stage that's going to come in her life. So it is an important point here. The AME Church had teachings on charity. There was this notion that you need to give, the whole dollar money system that you know, Reverend Tyler. Everyone was expected to give money. Everyone was expected to give at least $1 to help fund the work of the church. But if you imagine coming into this Black-owned, Black-run institution, the people in the pulpit are Black, the people in charge are Black, the money funding it is Black, after having come from a small, segregated, struggling town like Delta, Louisiana, right? And you see Black people in charge, and you hear about them building schools and doing things in Africa, places you can't even pronounce or couldn't even dream of going. And there's this vision of freedom. There's this print and oral culture through the publications that the AME Church has. This is a whole new world for young Sarah. And so I argue in the book that it's being in this environment provided by the church under the tutelage of the women. And there's some women that I highlight in the text who nurtured her and mentored her, that she really evolves into this role of a giver, of one who's engaged in providing service as she's living out her faith and her sense of responsibility to her people.
So, all right. So, first of all, point of personal privilege. So, although I'm from California, I attended seminary in Ohio, and the district that I came out of, the AME Church, is so vast. Geographically, it's the largest district. It spans from California to St. Louis because there's so few Black folk in between. And my bishop decided that I was going to have my first ordination in St. Louis rather than in California. And so I was ordained an itinerant deacon at St. Paul AME Church, her church.
Right. Wow.
And I got to tell you that it's still a great congregation. I mean, it is still we call that our mother church of the West. So the first AME Church west of the Mississippi, tremendous history, started by a woman who would actually ferry AME preachers from the free state of Illinois into the Mississippi. And they preached from the water so they wouldn't get arrested. So I'm just amazed at this legacy of, strong women who influenced her. Who are some of the women that you discovered? And are there some stories that we should know about?
Yeah, so one of the women, her name is Jessie Batts Robinson. She was a school teacher in St. Louis, and she was a member of St. Paul. She also was in other organizations like the National Association for Colored Women and for a Black fraternal organization called the Court of Philanthropy, which also had a focus on charity and engagement. But she was a woman who was active in the church. She ran the Mite Missionary Society, which is a thriving part of the AME Church history, this women's auxiliary where they would do home and foreign missions work. Again, this idea of uplifting the race, bringing the gift of God's love to others through service and dealing with local circumstances on the ground. And so Jessie's this pivotal figure for Sarah. And we see that Sarah and Jessie develop this powerful relationship. They become lifelong friends. Later, Jessie actually works for the Walker Company, but she also remains this anchor because Madam ends up moving on and living in different cities, but she always stays connected to St. Louis. And there's lots of letters in the archive between Jessie and Madam, just talking about what's going on in St. Paul, what the Mite Missionary Society is up to, and all these different things that are going on in the ground. But Sarah saw women like Jessie fighting the local fight against Jim Crow in St. Louis, interacting with, again, the National Association of Colored Women as they were dealing with national issues, everything from providing schooling and care for children to dealing with lynching and fighting the lost cause narrative, where the Confederates were trying to, put forward this myth that they won, right? And I mean, we have some kind of mirror of that going on right now, right? But there was just lots of things that the Black club women, the Black church women used to uplift the race, to engage in struggle. And there's just beautiful histories that have been written about this. Shout out to Temple University's Betty Collier Thomas, whose work's been very important to my ability to do this book, and so many other Black women's historians who have really laid out this incredible history of Black club women and Black church women who've been doing this from the beginning. It's not new, it's ingrained in who they are. So Jessie kind of represents that woman. And these are the kind of women that remind me of the women in my family. I'm the son, grandson, nephew, and cousin of Baptist preachers. My grandfather pastored King Solomon Church, Baptist Church in Philadelphia. And other churches in Philly are part of my nurturing because I used to spend my summers there. My mother's from North Philly, Grace Baptist Church, Nazarene Baptist Church. I just used to go there all the time. And the way the camps that they would run, the programs that they would run, the ways in which women would take their auxiliaries and use them as basis of platforms of power and authority and influence to raise their families, to fight against negative narratives about Black life and doing all these other things. It's something I grew up with, and it was incredible to go back and see it in the archives, see it in these histories, because that's what I said, oh, that's where my mom got it from. That's where my grandmother got it from, my great-grandmother, right? And so Madam Walker is a part of that history that I think we can see through our mothers and the other women who've been kind of the bloodlines and foundations of our communities.
Wow. So listen, if folk are tuning in a little bit late, we're talking to Dr. Tyrone Freeman. And Doc, just so people know, because someone may not have the entire time to spend with us, what is the name of the actual title of the book once again?
Oh, sure. It is Madam C.J. Walker's Gospel of Giving, Black Women's Philanthropy During Jim Crow. from the University of Illinois Press.
Excellent, excellent. And if you have questions, you can post them in the chat, and we will be sure to incorporate those questions as well for Dr. Freeman. And behind me here is a picture of Richard Allen, the founder of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and his wife, Sarah Allen, who outlived him, was known to be an operator on the Underground Railroad, a businesswoman. She took over a lot of their rental properties and kept the rent book. And by your definition, absolutely a philanthropist, and help people with her means. Is there anything in the writing of Madam C.J. Walker that talks about how she understood the larger picture of the AME Church, or was this more just as a member of St. Paul and these other congregations? Is that where the influence came?
I think it's a mixture of both, because in her correspondence, she very often talks about the joy of giving, citing 2 Corinthians, right? The Lord loves a cheerful giver. And when you look at Allen's writings and teachings on charity and giving, you see this ethos, this idea that everyone has a responsibility to give, because if God gave his only begotten son as a gift to a world that didn't deserve it, right? Then the least we can do is be generous and give to others as well. And so there are these teachings that she was exposed to. There's also just, she actually converted. She was in a Baptist family. I know you can run with this all day, Reverend. She grew up in a Baptist family, but when she came to St. Paul's, the experience was so palpable and powerful for her that she converted. And so every other city that she lived in, one of the first things she did was got connected with the local AME congregation, whether it's Shorter Chapel in Denver or Bethel in Indianapolis. And so the church's ethos, its culture, its teachings, its ways of being were a very important part of her. And these are the kinds of things that I argue shaped her own moral imagination, her sense of what could be, her sense of responsibility to her people, and why she began what I say is giving along the way. This idea that you don't spend your life accumulating wealth and then later in old age become concerned about others and begin giving. So no, you do what you can with what you have at any given moment, because there's always someone worse off, right, who could benefit from you. But most importantly, here she is, she's a Black woman, right? And all the Black women out there who might know far better than I, right? But what that means. But like this is a situation where it doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter what fame or acclaim you rise to. You're still Black and you're still female in Jim Crow America. And that means you are still subject to all the indignities and indecencies that go, the threats of lynching, the threats of rape, the threats of everything, right? It doesn't matter. There's no insulation from that. So in that way, Madam Walker, even the millionaire Madam Walker, is in need of as much liberation as the poorest of the poor amongst her people. So this connectedness, this sense of identity, this double consciousness, this collective consciousness that Black people share, right? These are the things that undergird giving in the African American community, and this collective ethos that we've got to work together and do things to kind of push back against these systems and bring about true equality.
All right, so money doesn't just evaporate when people give, and especially when they invest in people and in institutions. So she died, what, 1919?
Yes.
So is her money still circulating? I mean, so are there institutions where she placed it, places where she invested it, where you look as a researcher and a scholar and a biography of hers and say, Madam played a part in this. You should, where you like walk past people like, young man, young woman, you should thank Madam C.J. Walker.
Well, one of the most powerful references to this came in 1952. Walter White was the executive secretary, which meant the kind of the CEO of the NAACP. And he was actually attending a graveside memorial service in New York at Madam Walker's grave, where a collection of beauticians from around the country have come together to honor her and her daughter. They're both buried together in the same plot at Woodlawn Cemetery. And one of the statements that he made, according to newspaper coverage of the event, he said that the NAACP would not have survived the Great Depression were it not for Madam Walker's generosity. And this is a very powerful thing because he says this in 1952. And you think about all we know now about 1952 and the civil rights movement, they are on the cusp of what we know as to be the big wins, the 54 Brown versus Board of Education decision, or all the boycotts and the later the civil rights acts of the 1960s, right? All of those things are beginning to kind of come together. And the NAACP is in position as one of the key organizations there. And the leader of it credits Madam Walker with its ability to be there. Said it wouldn't have survived the Depression. That's powerful when we stop and think about that. She died in 1919. He says this 33 years later, right? And so during her lifetime, she gave money to the NAACP, including on her deathbed, a $5,000 pledge to its anti-lynching campaign. But what he's referring to is that she left her mansion to the NAACP in her will. And so the NAACP was able to use those assets to deal with some of its financial issues. So that's just one example, but she gave money to Booker T. Washington at Tuskegee Institute, which is now Tuskegee University. She gave during her lifetime, and she put Tuskegee in her will. She gave to St. Paul. St. Paul was in her will. Many of the churches she attended were in her will. YWCAs and YMCAs were in her will. There's an organization in Indianapolis that's still thriving and doing its thing today called Flanner House, which was a Black social settlement organization that she gave to and left money in her will for that. Interestingly, back during her lifetime, the Flanner House helped the local Black community of Indianapolis deal with the tuberculosis outbreak. And now, the past year, Flanner House has been helping the west side of Indianapolis deal with COVID. And so there's lots of these types of connections. And those are the organizations. There were also people that she left lifetime income to, and that they used that to get education or to buy property. She left money and other resources behind for employees, for her chauffeur, for a whole range of networks of people that were important to her in one way or another as a way of distributing those resources. So her legacy lives on in many different ways today. And it's interesting how each generation discovers her and does something with her legacy and kind of then propels her on to the next generation to discover.
That is, first of all, that's amazing. I mean, we just kind of think about that and her concern for legacy. When you look around today, do you see like modern Madam C.J. Walkers or people who kind of feel like to you really embody that same spirit?
I do. And again, I go back to the countless Black club women and church women, like who raised me, who I knew, and see every Sunday in church, right? Doing their thing. They'll never make the front page of your big newspaper or that sort of thing. And they wouldn't expect to, because many of them don't even use the word philanthropy, don't think of themselves as philanthropists. They might say they're just doing the Lord's will, or doing what you're supposed to do, or doing what their parents raised them to do, or doing what God expects them to do. But these are the kind of the silent givers, if you will, the day-to-day givers who really are the backbone of this community's generosity and have been there from the beginning. And so I think it's important to raise them up and to recognize them. I think you see this ethos in all the activists who've gotten a lot of attention over the past year in particular, but who've been doing it more long-term. Madam Walker was on the front lines of the anti-lynching movement of her day, which is kind of the original Black Lives Matter, if you will, because lynching was rampant. There's been a lot of attention recently on Tulsa, but those kinds of, Madam Walker lived during this era. She died right before Tulsa particularly, but she had seen massacres like in Colfax, Louisiana, and other places that were happening around her birth and her early life, that where just Black people were just killed, terrorized, and no justice at all. And so she felt compelled to be a part of those movements and to do what she could. That's why she invested $5,000 in the NAACP's effort to get public policy protections. And so I think you see this strand of generosity, this strand of engagement through today's activists, through today's church women, club women, giving circle members, people who are not familiar with giving circles. Giving circles are just ways that people come together. They decide to collectively pool money into a fund. The fund might be held by a community foundation or by some other institution. And they collectively decide where that money goes as far as a charity is concerned or a nonprofit organization. America is going through a revolution of giving circles over the past few decades. Many different Americans of all backgrounds are joining these giving circles, and some of them are around youth or the environment, or some of them have racial identity, Black women's giving circles. And it's very important that this is kind of mimics the communal ways of giving that, again, are historic, right? You think about putting money in the plate at church. You think about being a member of a fraternity or a sorority and paying your dues, right? These are the ways in which people have given their money over time. And so a giving circle is kind of the modern iteration of that. And so there are literally thousands of giving circles, and more are being created every day. And Black women in particular, but Black men as well, are joining them and being very active in using them to deal with social justice issues. So this type of giving is everywhere. And while I do think Oprah Winfrey has more in common with Madam Walker than with Andrew Carnegie or some of the other storied white philanthropists who tend to get most of the attention, what I think the key lesson about Madam Walker's story is that it's not just about the elite. It's about everyday Black people and how they use what they have to respond to the needs of their community.
All right, so I have the a research agenda for you for your next work.
All right, give it to me.
So Mother Bethel, we're on our 4th building. So the property is the oldest parcel of land continuously held by African Americans. We've had the land since 1791, and the first building is 1794. This 4th building that we're in now, well, COVID has us out of it, but when we go back in it, was built in 1889. And to pay the mortgage, a group of women in the church organized an effort where they asked for persons to give an extra 13 cents a week until the mortgage was paid. It was called the 13 Cents a Week Club.
Wow.
I think Dr. Tyrone Freeman should write that book.
I like that.
Look, he's taking notes. I know it. Right?
I'm serious.
I
love it.
Yes, it's a great story. And speaking, all right, so in that same light, here's a question from Jean Wolfe. Jean is a great historian. She knows that story, I'm sure. She says, for those who are less knowledgeable about where she gained her wealth, Madam C.J. Walker, that is, can you give us some understanding of how she became wealthy enough to spread her funds so freely?
Yes. So when she was in St. Louis, she was a washerwoman. That was a very important part of her story. And it turns out that Black washerwomen in the South were actually very generous and very engaged in their community too. This is where works of historians like Tara Hunter is so important from Princeton, looking at Black washerwomen and the ways in which they engaged in activism and pooled resources and mutual aid strategies. But along the way, she began working for another Black woman named Annie Malone, also from in the St. Louis area, who had a company called Poro, and selling beauty products. And so she started working in the beauty culture industry through Annie Malone, a Black woman who goes on to become wealthy, also very active and engaged. There were several things named for her in St. Louis today. And again, Netflix didn't really do her justice, but she deserves her own book and her own movie. But this is kind of her entree into it. But along the way, she begins developing her own product. There's different stories on how that actually evolved, various versions of it, but she developed her own version of those kinds of products to meet the needs of Black women. And she married a man named Charles Joseph Walker, who was this kind of salesman in newspapers and marketing, advertising kind of guy. And so that's where the Madam C.J. Walker came from. So she puts her name and her face on the product as Madam C.J. Walker, which is revolutionary for the time. The standard of beauty is white women. Nobody's really checking for Black women and their products and what they need, right? And so she really kind of stakes out this claim in the marketplace, begins selling them door to door. And I should say that this kind of takes place in Denver. She goes out to Denver. She's selling Annie Malone's products and she's developing her own. Some tensions emerge between the two of them, but she begins to her products begin to take off. She separates from Annie Malone and then moves to Pittsburgh, does some more development there, and she moves to Indianapolis in 1910. And this is where she begins really becoming a household name. The products are taking off. She formally incorporates the business there in Indianapolis, sets up the headquarters, and to this day, Indianapolis is kind of the focal point of Madam Walker's legacy. And that's where kind of the legend is born. So she goes on, she traveled relentlessly around the country, directly selling the products, doing demonstrations, showing Black women how to use the products to style their hair in different ways. She also developed a network of beauty schools, which is a part of her investment in education that I argue. And I say in the book that she actually ends up out Tuskegeeing Booker T. Washington, because she develops a mode of industrial education that effectively helps to integrate Black women into northern urban industrial economies, whereas Washington wanted Black folks to stay in the South on farms. And so it's really, really interesting just to look at the trajectory of her company. According to newspapers, there were as many as 20,000 agents around the country in the Walker system. It's difficult to corroborate that, but those are some numbers that have been floated around. But these agents were everywhere. There were some people overseas. She was beginning to move into the Caribbean and developing an international sensibility as you know, and then she dies because it doesn't really get to fulfill that. But you know, so this is where it comes from. Selling these basic products. There were face powders, there were shampoos, styling gels for hair, and things like that that allowed Black women to begin to develop their own aesthetic and to be able to present themselves, which is important. If you think about Jim Crow, you think about what Jim Crow would say about Black life and the negative narratives. So for a Black woman to be able to present herself in a way that she finds appealing is an important source of esteem and development for this era.
So, all right, well, now you're talking about a time where Black folk did not have a lot of disposable income. So can you talk a little bit about what these demonstrations look like when she went to somebody's house, and how did she get them to part with their money? I mean, she must have been a good salesperson.
She was relentless. And actually, I mean, on a serious note, she literally worked herself to death. She died of what we would think of now as hypertension, stress-related illnesses, right? She was just constantly on the road. And so she would roll into town, and there's beautiful correspondence. By the way, her papers are at the Indiana Historical Society. There's 40,000 documents. They are all digitized now. When I was doing this, they weren't. I had to go through my hand. But any of you now can log in and you can look at these letters directly. I hope that you'll do that. But there's beautiful correspondence between her and her right-hand man, a Black lawyer named Freeman B. Ransom, who was from Mississippi, had studied law at Columbia, and had been working in Indianapolis. And they met early in 1910 when she arrived there. And she becomes his general manager. And so one of the things, she would go on this tour. She would do 7, 8, 9 cities, and she would write letters back to him, have him send products ahead to the next city, making sure everything was set up for each demonstration. She might connect with a local church and do something in their basement, or with a fraternal order and then do it in their lodge or in people's homes. She also would do large speaking events, and there'd be an admission that would be charged. And then she would also use some of those funds to support anti-lynching causes. There was a reference, Reverend Tyler, to an AME minister who was being accused of murder, whom she used the proceeds of one of her speaking engagements to invest in his legal defense. I wasn't able to track down the legal footprints of that, but that's something that's out there. So again, she was always looking for opportunities to do things and invest. But this is what she would do. And then you could become an agent, and then you could sell the products retail. She would sell them to you wholesale, and you can retail them and make your money back. You could also become kind of a trainer of other agents for her, and teach people the method. And she had this process whereby she would invest in your startup. She would give you money to open up your storefront or to renovate a little bit so that you could hang your shingle and start doing business. There's a few examples in the archive that I found where she did this, and I didn't find any repayment. There was only one that mentioned a process of repayment, but the others, there was no records of repayment. So it was really interesting. She was really trying to do this economic boost and engine for Black women and get as many women into the system as possible, but to try to create these economic pathways where they could begin developing wages that weren't possible as a washerwoman or some of the other menial or domestic levels of work that Jim Crow restricted Black women to.
So I mean, how big was this operation? Are we talking like scores of people, hundreds of people, thousands? I mean, how vast was this operation in her empire?
So again, so I mentioned the 20,000 reference, but so the headquarters was in Indianapolis, but she also kind of had these stations in other cities that were kind of service supply stations. There was one in St. Louis that her friend Jessie Robinson helped her run. But another key indicator is in 1916, she began organizing her agents into clubs. They were called Walker Clubs or Walker Unions. And many of these were modeled after the National Association of Colored Women, but they're also modeled after African American fraternal orders. And her purpose for bringing them together was, one, she wanted her agent. There were so many agents that they often didn't know each other, even though they were in the same city. So she wanted to create these clubs as a way so you could know the other agents in your city, begin being in fellowship and develop some camaraderie. Also to fend off imposters, because there were a lot of people entering the market. There were some people that were literally take the labels off her products and put their own labels on it and try to sell it. So they're trying, again, to build awareness of the brand and that sort of thing. But she also told them that it was not enough for you to sell products in your region or in your city. You had to uplift the race. And so the women in these clubs, and I was able to find about 50 of these clubs around the country. So that gives you a sense of scope, where again, that they are, they're engaging in fundraisers for the NAACP, participating in protests, donating furniture to Black colleges. So they took that sense of racial uplift and responsibility for the race seriously as they were trying to carve out these new economic pathways for themselves. So it was a major operation. There was even some correspondence from a woman from India who had said she had used Madam Walker's products and was reporting back on the value and the impact of it. So it's a far reach.
This is incredible. All right, so there are a number of questions populating in the chat and in the Q&A. So I'm going to jump. This is not necessarily in order but this is on topic. So what happened to her business after she passed away? Where does all of this go?
So it really, the women in her family ran the company for decades, from her daughter to her granddaughter, and it just kind of continued. And actually, the family retained ownership until the 1980s or so. And then another local family in Indianapolis bought it, maintained it for a while. That family sold it in the early 2010s to a man named Richie Lou Dennis. If you know the Shea Moisture brand, he bought Madam Walker's company and integrated it into his Sundial brand of products, which was then sold to Unilever, and sold Madam Walker's products through Sephora for a brief time. Now it's no longer in Sephora, but they're revamping and they're developing a new distribution strategy. But so the products are actually still here. The company still exists in name, but it's under the Sundial brand in the Unilever Corporation.
All right, well, so thank you for that question, Eileen. And then a related question from Trina, Gary. So have the formulas for her products been preserved? And if so, by whom?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And this is where, shout out to Alelia Bundles, who is Madam Walker's great-great-granddaughter and chief biographer. My work wouldn't be possible without Alelia's kindness to me. And her book, On Her Own Ground, was the basis for the Netflix series. And she's been a companion for me on this journey and opened up the family archives in many ways. And Alelia has done a lot looking at the archives. You can, looking at the formulas. But sulfur was kind of the main, one of the main ingredients. And things have evolved and advanced so far now in terms of what you can use and what you can't use and what has been learned about the scalp. So things are very different now. But the aspects of the business kind of maintain those old formulas, but they're not publicly available.
All right, so we can't Google that.
No.
That's the only thing. We can get her letters, but we can't get her formula.
I don't think so, no.
There's something wrong with that. That's a long patent, but well, we are talking about Madam C.J. Walker, right? So a couple other things of note. So again, the house, her mansion in Irvington.
Yes.
It's on the National Historic Registry. And according to Cheryl, is looking for renovation funds. Do you know what's going on with the home now?
Yeah, so Madam Walker left Indianapolis in 1916 to go to New York. She had a house in Harlem. Her daughter was there, and there was a branch of the school there, the Walker School, Lilly College that was there, and so New York was this vibrant, bustling place. We all know about Harlem and on the cusp of the Harlem Renaissance, lots of things going on there. So she moved to Harlem while her mansion was being built, and so it is in a place called Irvington on Hudson. It ended up with 34 rooms. It cost $250,000 to build. And John D. Rockefeller lives about 10 minutes away. So this was an exclusive white neighborhood where where she had no business being, but she went anyway. And she built this beautiful house. It still stands to this day, as was just mentioned. And actually, the gentleman I mentioned before, Richie Lou Dennis, purchased Madam Walker's mansion a few years ago, and he has said that it's going to be dedicated to uplifting women as entrepreneurs, kind of a think tank focal point to really kind of keep this ethos going. So those plans are still kind of evolving. And part of that deal, I should say, was a $100 million fund to support Black women entrepreneurs. So all of these things are interconnected. And the latest I heard of that was that those kind of plans are still unfolding. But he did purchase that. And so the person who owns Walker's company owns the house. And we'll see how that story continues to evolve and what ends up happening with the property.
Wow. All right. So one related question to her philanthropy, then we're going to zero back in on that as we start to look toward wrapping this up. But what was her educational background? Someone wants to know.
Sure. So as one could imagine, it's kind of this emerging Jim Crow. There was no, education for her, no formal schooling. So she never had formal schooling. Now, Lilia Bundles thinks she may have had some exposure through St. Paul's to a night school, which is a possibility. But no formal training. There is a reference in her curriculum that in the introductory bio part about her, it says that she took some commercial courses, but it doesn't say where or when or what that might have looked like. But one of the things, we do have a surviving interviews of some of her original employees. There's a woman named Violet Reynolds who lived in her 90s. Madam Walker hired her when she was 15 years old, right there in Indianapolis. In one of her interviews, she says that Madam Walker would kind of come into the office every day and would read the newspaper. And if she came across a word that she didn't know, she was not ashamed to circle it and just ask anyone around her, can you tell me what this word means? So she's constantly trying to improve herself. There were lots of receipts in the archive for books that she was buying, stocking kind of this library in her house. So someone who had this thirst for knowledge is something that was denied her. And then of course she founds her own line of beauty schools. And in looking at the curriculum, you could see that it's this mix of art and science, where there's the diseases of the scalp and different techniques for washing hair and styling hair, as well as budget and management and marketing skills. So she's a woman who's constantly evolving, who wanted to know more, and she wasn't afraid to admit what she didn't know. She surrounded herself with the best of the best. Freeman B. Ransom, as I said, a Black man who had studied law. He was her right-hand man. She relied upon him to maintain house while she was out and about, and she would give him instructions from the road. There were other people, Marjorie Stewart Joyner, who was a hairdresser out of Chicago, whose papers are in the Chicago Public Library System, the Vivian Harsh Collection. It goes on to be a big name in Black beauty culture, leading to certification and recognition of it as a nationally noble pursuit. So she just surrounded herself with people who knew more than her and who she could rely upon to help implement this vision.
All right, so So let's tighten this up because we got a few minutes left, and and go back to where we began with Madam C.J. Walker, the philanthropist. So we know about her as the millionaire. Just this incredible story from rags to riches. There's no more of an American story than her story, right? But so as a philanthropist, one of the questions is by Anita in the chat. So do you think that there's a different mindset for Black philanthropists versus white philanthropists? Has your research uncovered any of that or your own feelings?
Yeah, so we know that. So first of all, there's this myth out there that Black people don't give. That is just not true. Black people do give. They always have. They always will. And so even when we look at the research and the data on giving, you can control for race, you can control for income and education. There's no statistically significant difference between giving amongst the races. Everybody gives, right? What is different are the motivations or the things that they might give to. And so a significant percentage of African American givers say that giving to support the race or support the community is very important, which again, coming out of this history makes a lot of sense, right? This is what historically has had to be relied upon in order to achieve and to develop some of the gains that have been made. And so those type of motivations are still very important. It's thought of as kind of a racial uplift motivation is very key and critical for many African American donors and givers, which might distinguish them from other kinds of givers. But it turns out communities of color tend to be first vested in their own organizations and their own communities before they go out and invest in others. The short answer is that, right, that Black people give, they support lots of different organizations and institutions, but also in this tradition, there's no kind of distance between the giver and the recipient. Traditionally, when we think about philanthropy, we think about what you can and can't deduct on your taxes, right? You can deduct your donation to a 501c3 nonprofit that's going to take your money and give it to help strangers, people you don't know. You can't deduct money you might give to your nephew to go to school or to buy that car, right? But in this tradition, there's really no distinction, because charity starts at home. And so you see Madam Walker giving money to and giving resources. Again, this is not just about money, but you see her giving to family, to friends, to neighbors, and to strangers. You see her giving it to people on the street and to Black-led organizations, right? It's a comprehensive view that is just kind of giving and engaging to those in need, and giving and engaging to bring down these systems that are circumscribing Black life. And so in that way, she's a versatile giver. And she, and this is before tax deductibility. All the tax deductions and all that stuff comes out of late 20th century tax policy, right? But philanthropy goes back before there was even an American. So I'm talking about a definition of philanthropy that's not limited to tax policy, but that one is really more focused on expressing human dignity, responding to the needs, responding to larger systems of oppression, and using all the available resources you have to give. In fact, each of the chapters in the book is named for a different kind of gift that Madam Walker gave. And there's only one chapter about money. The other chapters are about the gift of opportunity, where I talk about how she used her business as a platform for economic development for Black people and providing employment and opportunities for people who are not supposed to be employed, not supposed to be thriving. And yet she creates this economic pathway for them. The education chapter is about how she used her network of schools to provide education in a Jim Crow context where Black people are not supposed to be given a quality education. Yet you could earn a credential and begin developing your own economic potential in the marketplace by going through Madam Walker's school. And there's a chapter about activism, this notion of activism as philanthropy, that you have to speak truth to power. You have to speak out against lynching. You have to speak up for Black soldiers during World War I, as she did, who were fighting thousands of miles away overseas in theaters for freedoms that were not guaranteed to them at home. She saw the deep hypocrisy in that, and she called white politicians to the carpet over it. And along with others like Mary Church Terrell and Mary McLeod Bethune and other great Black women from history, demanding legal protections, demanding citizenship. So again, this is an all hands on deck approach to philanthropy and generosity, using any and every kind of resource that can make a difference for someone in need, or that can make a difference in this larger ongoing fight for justice and equality.
Wow. So you actually answered the last question that was out there from Tess, which was, what did she give to the specific causes and things of that nature? And so let me ask you this as a kind of a final question. As you look into, like, if you could kind of go back and, rewrite history, if she had not died at really what was the beginning of the Great Migration, and Isabel Wilkinson's work on The Warmth of Other Suns is amazing, just talking about how it changed America, how Black folk burst out of the South into the North and into the West. What do you think would have been her impact if she lived another 30 years and had that kind of landscape to work with, given what she'd already done?
Yeah, it's a great question. Who knows? And not only that, but she had moved to Harlem, right, and to New York, right, and so the Harlem Renaissance is beginning, right, and so all the attention and all the things that are going on there, right, she would have had a front row seat to all that. And it turns out her daughter became a philanthropist to many Black writers and artists. Was hanging out with Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston and others in Harlem. And I should say, Alelia Bundles is writing the book about Madam Walker's daughter, which should be out next year. Her name was Alelia Walker Robinson. So stay tuned for that. But who knows? I mean, I think she definitely would have stayed in the fight against lynching. She definitely would be. She missed suffrage by a year, again with the 1920 changes there for women's suffrage. But I think she still would have been speaking truth to power. She still would have been out there engaging, trying to grow that business and use that as a base of power to then make demands. She she and her agents had already sent a resolution to President Woodrow Wilson, and she went to Washington, D.C. to try to meet with him, and he stood them up. But this was a woman who was fearless, and she was also partnering with people like Marcus Garvey and Adam Clayton Powell Sr. and Du Bois and others, developing a Pan-African sensibility and taking the struggle international. The last year of her life, she helped to found an organization called the International League of Darker Peoples, which sought to connect the African American struggle for freedom with the struggles of Black people across the diaspora, and was making international connections to begin doing that work. And of course, Black women had long, and the AME Church had long been thinking internationally through its missions work and building schools and doing other things. So she would have been right up in the mix of all those things that were happening. So who knows what even larger impact and more reason to still be talking about her.
So Woodrow Wilson stood her up.
Yeah,
I'm so surprised that a man who would show Birth of the Nation in the White House would stand up.
Yeah, why would he do that?
C.J. Walker. Oh, well, listen, unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. But can you please just lift the book up one more time and give us the title, Dr. Tyrone Freeman, because a lot of questions keep coming in about the specific causes, where she spent her money. All of those things can be answered in your own copy of Madam C.J. Walker's Gospel of Giving, Black Women's Philanthropy During Jim Crow. The author is holding the book right there, Dr. Tyrone Freeman. It's been my honor to be with you. I'll give you the last word.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. And let me also say, I'm a graduate of Lincoln University, so shout out to all the Lions out there, class of 1995. And so I'm just grateful for you tuning in. The bottom line is that, generosity is something that's very important. In this tradition of giving, it's not about wealth. That wealth, philanthropy doesn't come from wealth. It comes from generosity. And generosity is really a matter of the heart. And that means that any of us can give, regardless of race, regardless of bank account. Any of us can give of ourselves to respond to the needs of others and to respond to the larger calls of this moment for justice in so many different arenas. And so I think Madam Walker's story gives us an easy way to do it. Her gospel of giving is something that's short and simple. It's basically this idea of giving along the way. And it says, give all that you can, spare no useful means, and as you acquire more, give more. And I think that's something that any of us can do. We don't have to wait. We don't have to spend our lives accumulating wealth. We can do what we can with what we have right now and make a huge and powerful difference, not only in our neighborhoods, but in the larger world. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you both, Dr. Mark Kelly Tyler and Dr. Tyrone McKinley Freeman for a wonderful conversation. Tess is just put up here online, and she also put it in the chat if you want to just, copy that and stick it onto your browser so that you can buy Tyrone's book and bookshop.org, which is an online site that supports independent bookstores, and a portion of the proceeds goes to support your local independent bookstore, and a portion comes to support the Athenaeum. So I encourage you to buy the book. If you are not in a place where you can buy the book, I invite you also to check it out from the Athenaeum's library and enjoy reading it too. But pick it up however you do and read it, and give you great food for thought as this conversation has. It will be going up on YouTube tomorrow, so you can share it with other people to continue spreading the good news of Madam C.J. Walker's fascinating life. So much gratitude to you again, to Trina and to Nancy for getting you on my radar. We're so glad you came and spoke with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. We look forward to hosting you and giving you the red carpet when you come and visit Philadelphia next time.
I would love that. Would love that. Thank you. It'd be my honor.
Thank you. And the thanks are coming in on the chat if you want to look at those, and invite everybody again in the chat. Give your thanks to Dr. Freeman and Dr. Tyler for tonight's conversation. And we look forward to seeing all of you again soon. Next week, we're coming down near to the end of our spring speaker series. We have next Tuesday, we have my book club reading Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower, the first of a very challenging, interesting, deals with questions of race and ecology and religion and worlds falling apart. And it's a fascinating book. If you have a chance to read it, want to join us next Tuesday evening, Worlds Beyond, Miniatures and Victorian Fiction with Laura Forsberg. And then on the 24th, Stephen Wertheim, How America Decided to Dominate, finishes our global look at the world. And in between that, we have on June 22nd, what should be another great conversation with Taya Wynn, who is the Executive Director of the Community Design Collaborative, about the work that they are doing in Philadelphia. So I look forward to seeing you at future events. Thank you for joining us this evening, and wishing everybody a wonderful rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
All right,
Thank you.
This is
all.
great.
Thank you.
I've got
Yeah.
a church meeting now, so.
Okay. All right.
Well,
Thank
Well,
you.
but you
Reopening.
did, you're a fantastic moderator. That was
Yes. Thank
wonderful.
you. That was
Thanks.
great.
Yeah, a ton of questions I wanted to ask. I'll bring you back on the show because I want to know her connection to Madam C.J. Walker and Ida B. Wells.
Okay. Oh yeah. Let's do it.
Specifically
I
about
wanted-
those relationships.
Well, let me know when
Anytime,
you
let's
do
do
that,
it.
because I wanted to ask that question too.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Good night, you
Great.
all.
Thank you.
for
Good
the
night.
All right.
Take care.
Thanks, Tess, for the
Good night.
tech.
Of course.
Yes. Thank you, Tess.